It started as an ordinary Tuesday evening. I came home from work, the usual hum of fatigue buzzing in my head after another grueling day at the office. Emily, my wife of 8 years, was in the kitchen chopping vegetables, humming softly to herself. It was such a familiar scene, a slice of life that felt safe and predictable. But looking back, it's almost eerie how normal everything seemed that night. We'd built a life together, 2 kids, a house in the suburbs, and countless memories that anchored us. Sure, the passion of the early years had faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of routines and responsibilities. But I thought we were good. Solid even. Every marriage has its lulls, right? So, when Emily started staying late at work more often or brushing off my questions about her day with vague excuses, I chalked it up to stress. She'd always been ambitious and driven. "It's the new project," she'd explain with a tired smile, or, "Janine and I are drowning in reports." I didn't push her. I trusted her. Or at least I thought I did. That night, though, something shifted. I went to the bathroom to grab a bandage after nicking my finger on a stubborn cabinet hinge. As I rummaged through the drawer, a tiny foil circle on the floor caught my eye. It was unmistakable, the kind you peel off a pregnancy test. My stomach dropped. Emily wasn't supposed to be taking pregnancy tests. 3 years ago, after the birth of our second child, we made the mutual decision for me to get a vasectomy. We agreed our family was complete. And as far as I knew, nothing had changed since then. So why? I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at that little piece of foil. My thoughts raced through every possibility, desperately grasping at innocent explanations. Maybe she was holding on to an old test for sentimental reasons. No, that didn't make sense. Maybe it wasn't hers. But my gut clenched with a certainty I couldn't ignore. Something was wrong. When I walked back into the kitchen, Emily was plating dinner, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. She looked up with a smile, and for the first time, it didn't feel comforting. It felt practiced. "How was work?" she asked casually, setting the plates down on the table. I mumbled something noncommittal, avoiding her gaze. She didn't press, instead launching into a story about an issue she'd dealt with at the office. Her words washed over me like white noise as I sat there, staring at my food, replaying the moment in the bathroom over and over in my head. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Emily went to bed early, claiming she had a headache, and I stayed in the living room, the TV on for background noise. My thoughts were racing, dissecting the past few months with a sharpness I hadn't felt before. The signs were there, I just hadn't wanted to see them. The late nights at work. The sudden enthusiasm for hitting the gym, which she'd never cared about before. The way she held her phone closer to her chest when a notification popped up. Had I been blind, or just in denial? By midnight I couldn't sit still anymore. My instincts were screaming at me, and I knew I wouldn't get any sleep without answers. Quietly, I crept into our bedroom, where Emily was sound asleep. I opened the drawer of her nightstand, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. There it was, an open box of pregnancy tests shoved toward the back. I pulled it out with shaking hands. The tests themselves were gone, but the receipt was still in the box, dated just 4 days ago. My heart sank. This wasn't a leftover from some distant past, it was recent. I sat back down in the living room, clutching the empty box as if it held the answer to every question running through my mind. There was only one conclusion that made sense, and it hit me like a freight train. If she's pregnant, it's not mine. The next morning was unbearable. I could feel the tension building inside me, like a pot of water on the verge of boiling over. Emily was in the kitchen making pancakes, flipping them with the ease of someone who had no idea her world was about to collapse. "Pancakes today, huh?" I said, trying to keep my voice even as I sipped my coffee. She smiled at me, that same warm, practiced smile I'd seen so many times. "I thought the kids would like it before school. They've been asking for them all week." The kids, blissfully unaware of the chaos brewing under our roof, were chattering at the table, arguing about syrup versus whipped cream. I smiled at them, though my mind was far from the morning routine. As I sat there, watching Emily move around the kitchen, I tried to make sense of everything. When had it started? Who was it? I replayed moments over the past few months that hadn't seemed significant at the time. Emily coming home with an extra bounce in her step, the new dresses she bought. Just because, and the way she'd been unusually attentive to her appearance lately. And then there were the absences. The teen dinners she'd mentioned in passing, always with Janine as her alibi. But something about those nights hadn't felt right, even then. Janine was a quiet woman, someone who hated socializing. I couldn't picture her voluntarily attending work dinners on a regular basis. It was all too much. The box, the foil, the missing pieces. It was a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to finish. That day at work, I couldn't focus. I kept scrolling through Emily's social media, looking for clues, but everything looked normal. Too normal. If anything, her posts about our family seemed overly curated, as though she was compensating for something. I stared at one photo in particular, a selfie of her and the kids at the park, all smiles and sunshine. It had been taken on a Saturday when I had to work overtime. I'd felt guilty missing the day with them, but now, that guilt was replaced by suspicion. Was that the day she met him? By the time I got home, my chest was tight with anxiety. Emily greeted me at the door with a quick kiss, her eyes flicking toward her phone as it buzzed on the counter. She didn't pick it up right away, but I noticed how her fingers twitched, itching to grab it. "You okay?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "You look stressed." I forced a smile. "Just a long day." As we ate dinner, I couldn't stop watching her. Every movement, every word felt rehearsed. She laughed at the kids' jokes and complimented my cooking like she always did. It was all so normal, and yet it wasn't. That night, I made a decision. If I wanted answers, I was going to have to find them myself. While Emily showered, I grabbed her phone. I knew her passcode, it hadn't changed in years, but my hands still trembled as I typed it in. I felt a pang of guilt as the screen unlocked, her life laid out in front of me. At first, everything seemed fine. Texts with friends, group chats about school fundraisers, and a dozen unread emails from stores offering sales. But then, I found a thread labeled simply, "Chris." My heart sank. I didn't recognize the name, and the conversation was buried under dozens of other threads. But the first message I read told me everything I needed to know. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing. Red heart." My blood ran cold. I scrolled up, the text becoming more explicit the farther back I went. Dates, plans, inside jokes, and memories I wasn't a part of. It was all there. And then, the message that turned my legs to jelly. "Have you told him yet? He's going to figure it out sooner or later." My mind went blank. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I barely heard the sound of the water shutting off in the bathroom. Panic surged through me, and I shoved the phone back onto the counter just as Emily walked into the room, a towel wrapped around her head. She smiled at me. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I croaked, my throat dry. "Just checking the time." I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears as I stared at her. She stood there, oblivious, looking so familiar and yet so foreign at the same time. I didn't recognize her anymore. That night, I lay awake next to her, my thoughts racing. There was no denying it now. Emily was cheating on me, and she was pregnant. But the child wasn't mine. I knew I had to confront her. I just didn't know if I could. The following day, I couldn't look at Emily the same way. Every smile, every casual remark, it all felt fake, like a carefully constructed facade to cover the betrayal. I went to work as usual, but my focus was non-existent. By lunch, I'd already decided that tonight would be the night. No more waiting. I picked up the kids from school on my way home. Their laughter in the car, their chatter about school projects and recess games, felt like a cruel reminder of the life Emily and I had built. A life she was so willing to tear apart. When we got home, Emily was in the living room, folding laundry. The sight of her doing something so mundane almost made me hesitate. But then I remembered the messages. The lies. The pregnancy test. My anger simmered beneath the surface, but I forced myself to stay calm. After dinner, I tucked the kids into bed, reading them their favorite stories as they dozed off. My chest ached as I watched them sleep, knowing their world was about to change. When I returned to the living room, Emily was scrolling through her phone. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "Emily," I said, my voice steady but cold. "We need to talk." She looked up, her brow furrowing slightly. "What's wrong?" I sat down across from her, meeting her gaze. "I found something. And I need you to tell me the truth." Her confusion quickly turned to nervousness. She set her phone down slowly, folding her hands in her lap. "What are you talking about?" I hesitated for a moment, but then plunged ahead. "The pregnancy test," I said bluntly, watching her face closely. "Why are you taking pregnancy tests, Emily? And don't lie to me, I'm not in the mood for games." Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face before she quickly masked it with a laugh that was far too forced. "Oh, that? It's nothing. I was just late, and I got worried. It's no big deal." "Really?" I leaned forward, my voice dripping with disbelief. "Because I had a vasectomy 3 years ago. So you want to explain how you could even think you might be pregnant?" The color drained from her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal searching for an escape route. I didn't let up. "And don't bother lying about it, Emily. I saw the messages. I know about Chris." Her mouth fell open, and for a moment, I thought she might faint. She sat there, stunned, her hands clutching the edge of the couch. You went through my phone? That's what you're upset about?" I snapped, my voice rising. "You're pregnant with another man's child, and you're worried about me checking your phone?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. Not this time. She took a shaky breath and tried to speak, her voice trembling. "It's not what you think, Jason." I stood up, pacing the room to keep myself from exploding. "Don't you dare try to downplay this. I saw the messages, Emily. You've been lying to me, to our kids, to everyone. And now this? You've destroyed everything we built together." Her tears spilled over, and she buried her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't want to hurt you." "Didn't want to hurt me?" I shot back, my voice shaking with rage. "Emily, you've been sneaking around behind my back, carrying another man's baby, and you're saying you didn't want to hurt me? Do you even hear yourself?" For a moment, the room was silent except for her quiet sobs. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, my entire world crumbling beneath me. Finally, she lifted her head, her face streaked with tears. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I swear I just—" She trailed off, shaking her head as if the words were too heavy to say. I stopped pacing and turned to face her, my voice low and cold. "How long?" She hesitated, her lip trembling. "A few months." "A few months," I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "And the baby? Is it his?" Her silence was answer enough. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. I couldn't even look at her anymore. My mind was spinning with anger, pain, and a deep, crushing sense of betrayal. "I want a divorce," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "Jason, no. Please. We can fix this. I'll end it with Chris. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't do this." "It's too late," I said, my tone flat. "You made your choice, Emily. You chose him. And now I'm choosing me." She broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably as I turned and walked out of the room. I felt nothing but emptiness as I climbed the stairs to the guest bedroom, knowing this was only the beginning of the end. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the weight of everything finally hit me. Our marriage was over. The woman I'd loved, the mother of my children, had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. And now, I had to figure out how to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. The next evening, the weight of everything I'd uncovered was unbearable. Emily was on the couch scrolling through her phone, the picture of casual ease. I couldn't believe how normal she seemed, like nothing was wrong, like she wasn't living a double life. I sat down across from her, my jaw tight. "Emily," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "We need to talk." She looked up, frowning slightly. "What's wrong?" For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me hoped she'd confess, that she'd see the pain in my eyes and come clean. But when she didn't, I let the words fall out like bricks. "The pregnancy test. Why were you taking one? And don't lie, I've had a vasectomy." Her face went pale, and her grip tightened on her phone. "Jason, it's not what you think," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "Then what is it?" I demanded, leaning forward. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like what I think." "Don't insult me, Emily." She looked down, avoiding my eyes. "I was just late, and I got scared." "It doesn't mean anything," she said weakly, her tone pleading. I scoffed, shaking my head. "Stop. Just stop. I saw the messages, Emily. I know about Chris." Her head snapped up, her face a mixture of shock and fear. "You went through my phone?" she asked, her voice trembling with anger and shame. "That's what you're upset about?" I barked, my voice rising. "That I went through your phone? Emily, you've been cheating on me. You're carrying another man's child. And you're worried about that?" Her lips quivered, and tears began to roll down her cheeks. "Jason, please. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't want to hurt you," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "You didn't mean for it to happen?" I repeated, standing up and pacing. "What, you just accidentally started a relationship with someone else? You accidentally got pregnant? Do you even hear yourself right now?" She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking as she cried. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want it to go this far," she said between sobs. I stopped pacing and turned to face her. "How long, Emily? How long has this been going on?" "A few months," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I clenched my fists, my body trembling with anger. "And the baby? Is it his?" Her silence was deafening, and I knew the answer before she could even nod. My heart sank. It was like the ground beneath me had disappeared, and I was free falling into an abyss I couldn't escape. "I want a divorce," I said finally, my voice cold and firm. Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her tear-streaked face. "Jason, no! Please don't do this. I'll end it with Chris. I'll fix this. We can go to counseling, work through this. Don't do this to us. To the kids." Her words stung, but I shook my head, the hurt too deep to ignore. "It's too late, Emily. You made your choice. You chose him. And now I'm choosing me." She broke down completely, sobbing into her hands as I turned and walked out of the room. I felt hollow, like all the emotions had been drained from me, leaving nothing but exhaustion in their place. That night, I slept in the guest room, staring at the ceiling as the events of the evening replayed in my mind. The weight of her betrayal crushed me, making it hard to breathe. Our marriage was over, and the woman I'd loved, the mother of my children, had destroyed everything we'd built. The only thing left to do now was pick up the pieces and figure out how to move forward. The morning after the confrontation was surreal. The house felt heavy, every sound magnified in the silence between Emily and me. We went through the motions of getting the kids ready for school, both of us trying to act like nothing had changed. But the tension was suffocating. As I poured cereal for our youngest, Sophie, Emily stood by the sink, sipping her coffee with red-rimmed eyes. She looked like she'd been crying all night. Good. Let her feel even a fraction of the pain she'd caused. "Dad, can we go to the park after school?" our older son, Ethan, asked, oblivious to the storm swirling around him. I forced a smile. "Sure, buddy. We'll see how the day goes." Emily glanced at me but quickly looked away when our eyes met. She didn't say a word the entire morning, and honestly, I didn't want to hear anything from her. After dropping the kids off, I sat in my car in the school parking lot, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I tried to process everything. Part of me wanted to drive straight to a lawyer's office, to get the ball rolling on the divorce. But the other part of me, angry, wounded, and still reeling, wanted answers. Why Chris? Why now? Was I so blind to the cracks in our marriage that I didn't see this coming? I couldn't sit still. I drove to a nearby coffee shop and sat in the corner, scrolling through my phone, looking for a divorce attorney. Just typing the words into the search bar made my stomach churn. This wasn't supposed to be my life. I wasn't supposed to be the guy whose wife betrayed him, whose family was falling apart. By the time I got home, Emily was sitting on the couch, waiting. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her face pale. Jason, she started, her voice trembling. I held up a hand. Don't. I don't want to hear more excuses. She flinched, but I didn't care. I wasn't here to comfort her or to make this easier for her. Jason, please, she said again, standing up. I need to explain. You deserve that much. Explain what? I snapped, my voice rising. That you've been cheating on me for months? That you're pregnant with his baby? What exactly do you think you can say to make this better? She looked down, tears spilling onto her cheeks. I know I messed up. I know I've destroyed everything. But I never stopped loving you. I swear, Jason, it wasn't about that. I laughed bitterly. Oh, it wasn't about love? Then what was it about, Emily? Convenience? Thrills? You wanted something exciting while I was here holding our family together? It wasn't like that. She sobbed. I was lonely, Jason. You've been so distant. You're always working, and when you're home, you're checked out. Chris, he listened. He made me feel seen. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. As much as I hated to admit it, there was a sliver of truth in what she said. I had been distant, pouring myself into work to provide for the family. But that didn't excuse what she'd done. It didn't justify the lies, the betrayal, or the child growing inside her that wasn't mine. So it's my fault? I said, my voice cold. You're blaming me for your choices? No, she cried. That's not what I'm saying. I take full responsibility for what I did. I don't know how to fix this. I shook my head, unable to look at her. You can't. It's broken, Emily. We're broken. Her sobs filled the room as I turned away, grabbing my keys. I needed air, space, anything to escape the suffocating weight of her tears and my own anger. I ended up at the park, sitting on a bench while kids played on the swings and couples strolled by, laughing. It felt like a cruel joke, watching these strangers live the life I thought I had. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Emily. I'm so sorry, Jason. Please, let's talk more tonight. For the kids' sake. For the kids. Of course, they were the only reason I wasn't already packing my bags. I couldn't let them be collateral damage in this mess. But I also couldn't see a way forward with Emily. The day dragged on, every minute filled with a toxic mix of anger and heartbreak. When I picked up the kids from school, they were full of energy, chattering about their day. Their joy was a stark contrast to the darkness I carried inside. As we walked into the house, Emily greeted them with a forced smile. She looked at me briefly, her expression pleading, but I ignored her. I wasn't ready to face her again. That night, after the kids were asleep, she tried again. Jason, can we please just talk? Calmly? I stood in the doorway of the guest room, arms crossed. Talk about what? How you're going to raise Chris's child while pretending everything is fine? Because that's not happening. She winced, her tears starting again. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family. Please, Jason. We can go to counseling, do whatever it takes. Just don't give up on us. Her desperation was obvious, but it didn't move me. You already gave up on us, Emily, I said quietly. The moment you chose him over me, over our family, you ended this. Now you have to live with it. I shut the door and left her crying in the hallway, the sound of her sobs haunting me as I lay awake in the guest room. The next day, I decided I couldn't keep avoiding it. I needed to deal with Chris directly. I wasn't sure what I was expecting from the man who had shattered my family. An apology, a fight, maybe just a chance to look him in the eyes and ask why. I found his number in Emily's phone, copied it down, and stared at it for hours before calling. When I finally pressed the button, my palms were slick with sweat, my heart pounding. The line rang twice before he answered. "Hello?" His voice was casual, completely unaware of who was on the other end. "This is Jason," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Emily's husband." There was a long pause, and I could practically hear the air shift on his end. "Jason," he said finally, his tone cautious. "I guess I should have expected this." "You think?" I shot back, anger flaring in my chest. "I know everything, Chris. I know about you, about the baby. So don't try to play dumb." He sighed heavily. "Look, I'm not going to make excuses. I know what we did was wrong." "Wrong?" I cut him off, my voice rising. "You didn't just make a mistake, Chris. You destroyed my marriage. You ruined my family. And for what? What did you think was going to happen?" He was silent for a moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was calmer than I expected. "I didn't mean for this to go as far as it did, Jason. I swear, it just happened." I laughed bitterly. "It just happened. That's what Emily said too. You two really are a perfect match." "Look, man, I don't know what you want me to say," he said, his tone shifting to defensive. "I care about Emily. I didn't plan for this, but I'm not going to pretend I don't have feelings for her." My knuckles whitened as I gripped the phone tighter. "Feelings? You care about her? You have no idea what love is. Love isn't sneaking around behind someone's back. Love isn't destroying lives to satisfy your own selfishness. You're a coward, Chris." "Jason." "No," I snapped, cutting him off again. "I'm done with you. Stay away from my family. If you think you're going to waltz into my kids' lives or play house with Emily, you're dead wrong. I'll make sure you regret ever stepping into my marriage." Before he could respond, I hung up, my hands shaking with adrenaline. The conversation had been everything I'd expected: frustrating, infuriating, and ultimately pointless. Chris didn't care about the fallout. People like him never did. I leaned back against the wall, my chest heaving. The anger coursing through me felt bottomless, but beneath it was something darker: despair. It wasn't just Emily who had betrayed me. It was the life we'd built, the future I thought we were heading toward. And Chris was just the face of it all. When I got home that evening, Emily was in the kitchen, preparing dinner like everything was normal. She looked up as I walked in, her expression wary. "Where were you?" she asked quietly. "I talked to Chris," I said, tossing my keys onto the counter. Her eyes widened, and her hands froze mid-motion. "You what?" "I wanted to hear it from him," I said, my tone sharp. "But all I got was the same garbage excuses you gave me. I told him to stay the hell away from my family. So don't think about dragging him into our kids' lives, Emily. It's not happening." She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, her shoulders sagging. "I didn't ask for this," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "No," I said, my voice cutting through the room. "But you let it happen. And now, you'll have to live with the consequences." Dinner was silent that night. The kids chatted about their day, blissfully unaware of the war raging between their parents. I played my part, nodding and smiling when necessary, but my mind was elsewhere, spinning with everything that lay ahead. By the time the kids were in bed, I had made up my mind. I couldn't live like this, trapped in the same house as Emily, pretending for the sake of appearances. I needed to take the next step. As I packed a small bag in the guest room, Emily appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving," I said without looking up. "Jason, no," she said, stepping into the room. "You can't just leave. The kids will be fine. I said, cutting her off. I'll come back for them. But I can't stay here, Emily. Not with you. She didn't try to stop me as I zipped up the bag and slung it over my shoulder. I walked past her without a word, ignoring the tears streaming down her face. When I got to the front door, I paused, my hand on the handle. This is on you, Emily, I said quietly. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. And with that I walked out, the night swallowing me whole as I stepped into the unknown. Walking out of the house felt like leaving a piece of myself behind. The weight of it was unbearable, but staying would have crushed me completely. I drove aimlessly for a while, the hum of the car the only thing keeping my mind from spiraling. It was late by the time I checked into a modest motel on the edge of town. The room smelled faintly of bleach and stale air, but it didn't matter. I wasn't there to be comfortable. I dropped my bag on the floor, sank onto the bed, and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in days there was silence, not the strained quiet of avoidance, but a true absence of noise. No Emily's sobs, no kids' laughter masking the tension, just silence. It should have been a relief, but instead, it felt like I was sinking into quicksand. The reality of everything began to hit me. My marriage was over. My family, as I'd known it, was broken. I thought I'd feel anger or sadness, but what I felt most was emptiness. Like someone had hollowed me out and left a shell behind. I couldn't sleep. Instead, I sat at the small desk by the window, scrolling through my phone, searching for divorce lawyers and tips on co-parenting through separation. The absurdity of it all hit me like a wave. How had my life come to this? Just weeks ago, I thought I was a husband with a future, a father with a stable home. Now I was a man trying to figure out how to navigate a life I never imagined. The next morning, I woke up with a stiff neck and the same gnawing emptiness. I needed to clear my head, so I drove to a nearby park and sat on a bench overlooking the lake. Couples walked hand in hand, kids fed the ducks, and joggers passed by with headphones in, their faces calm and focused. It felt like a different world, one where my problems didn't exist. I envied them. My phone buzzed. A text from Emily. Where are you? Are you okay? Please come back so we can talk. I didn't respond. I didn't have anything left to say to her. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts and found a number I hadn't dialed in years. My older brother, Mark. We hadn't been close. His job kept him moving from state to state, and I'd been too consumed with family life to keep up. But right now, I needed someone who wasn't tangled in the mess of my life. Jason? He answered after a few rings, his voice groggy. Hey, Mark. Sorry if I woke you. No, it's fine, he said, waking up fully. What's up? You sound off. I hesitated. I need a place to crash for a bit. Things at home are bad. He didn't ask for details, just gave me his address and told me to come over. That's the kind of guy Mark was, no questions, just action. By the afternoon, I was on the road, heading to his apartment a few towns over. The drive gave me time to think, though I wasn't sure if that was a good thing. My thoughts kept circling back to the kids. How would they react when they realized I wasn't coming home? How would they feel when they learned the truth about their mother? When I pulled into Mark's driveway, he was already waiting outside, leaning against his truck with his arms crossed. He looked the same as always, tall, broad, with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow that made him look like he was always ready for a fight. Jason, he said, pulling me into a quick, rough hug. You look like crap. Thanks, I muttered, managing a weak smile. Come on, he said, slapping my back. Let's get you inside. His apartment was small but cozy, a bachelor pad with mismatched furniture and a kitchen stocked with beer and frozen pizzas. It wasn't home, but it felt safe. Over a couple of beers, I told him everything, Emily, the affair, the baby, the fallout. He listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each detail. Jesus, Jace, he said when I finally finished. That's brutal. Yeah, I said, staring into my beer. I don't even know where to start. You start by not letting her walk all over you, he said firmly. Get a lawyer, figure out custody, and move forward. You're better off without her. I nodded, though his words didn't bring much comfort. Moving forward sounded simple in theory, but in reality, it felt like climbing a mountain with no end in sight. That night, as I lay on Mark's lumpy couch, I started making a plan. I wasn't going to let Emily's betrayal define me. I'd figure out custody, rebuild my life, and focus on being the best father I could be. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, one I never wanted, but one I had no choice but to face. The following morning, I woke up on Mark's couch to the smell of bacon frying in the kitchen. For a moment, I thought I was back home, that the past few days had been nothing but a bad dream. Then reality hit me like a punch in the gut. Finally up? Mark called from the kitchen. I thought you'd sleep all day. I dragged myself to the table, groaning as I sat down. Didn't sleep much? Yeah, well, I wouldn't either if I were you. He slid a plate of eggs and bacon in front of me. Eat. You'll need your strength if you're going to take on all this crap. I managed a weak smile. Mark's tough love approach was exactly what I needed. Over breakfast, we talked strategy. Mark was direct and no-nonsense, breaking things down in a way that made it feel manageable. First things first, he said, pointing at me with his fork. You need a lawyer. A good one. None of this discount, pay by the hour nonsense. Yeah, I muttered. I've been looking, but it's overwhelming. I don't even know where to start. Mark smirked. Lucky for you, I know a guy. He helped me out with a property dispute a while back. Tough as nails and doesn't take crap from anyone. I'll text you his info. I nodded, already feeling a small spark of hope. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. Don't thank me yet, he said. This is going to be messy, Jace. You need to be ready for a fight. Emily's going to play dirty, especially if this Chris guy is sticking around. Just hearing Chris's name made my stomach churn. The thought of him stepping into my kids' lives, trying to replace me, was unbearable. I'm not going to let that happen, I said, my voice firm. Good, Mark said. Now about the kids. Have you thought about what you're going to tell them? I hesitated, staring down at my plate. I don't know. They're so young. I don't want to drag them into this mess. You're not dragging them into it, Mark said gently. Emily did that. But they're going to figure out something's wrong sooner or later. Better they hear it from you than piece it together on their own. He was right, of course, but the thought of sitting Ethan and Sophie down to explain what was happening felt impossible. How do you tell your kids their family is falling apart? By mid-morning, I'd already called Mark's lawyer, a sharp-tongued woman named Diane. Within minutes of our conversation, I knew she was exactly what I needed. We'll start with filing for divorce and securing a temporary custody agreement, Diane said briskly. We'll also put measures in place to prevent Chris from having any involvement with the kids until the court finalizes custody. He's not a legal guardian, and we'll make sure it stays that way. Her confidence was reassuring, and for the first time since all this began, I felt like I had some control. The rest of the day was spent gathering paperwork, bank statements, birth certificates, anything Diane might need to build my case. It was tedious and emotionally draining, but I kept reminding myself why I was doing it, for Ethan and Sophie. They deserved stability, and I was going to give it to them. By the evening, I was exhausted. I sat on Mark's couch with a beer in hand, scrolling through old photos on my phone. There we were, smiling at the beach, decorating the Christmas tree, celebrating birthdays. Each photo felt like a relic from a life that no longer existed. My phone buzzed, and I almost ignored it, but then I saw the name, Emily. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen before I finally opened the message. Jason, can we talk? Please. For the kids. I sighed, setting the phone down without responding. I wasn't ready to face her yet. Not until I had a plan fully in motion. Everything okay? Mark asked, glancing over from the kitchen. Just Emily, I muttered. He raised an eyebrow. You going to talk to her? Eventually, I said. But not yet. I need to figure out what I'm going to say. And what I want. Mark nodded, grabbing a beer from the fridge and sitting beside me. Take your time. You've got this. His confidence bolstered me, and as the night went on, I began to feel a sense of clarity. The path ahead was daunting, but for the first time, it didn't feel impossible. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork, legal calls, and sleepless nights. Emily texted a few more times, but I ignored her. I wasn't ready to face her yet, not after what she'd done. My priority was the kids, and as much as I wanted to shield them from the mess, I knew the time was coming when I'd have to tell them. Mark helped me practice what I wanted to say. Keep it simple, he advised. They don't need every ugly detail, just enough to understand why things are going to change. I dreaded the conversation more than anything else. Ethan was old enough to notice that I wasn't coming home at night, and Sophie had already asked why Mommy seemed so sad. Every question felt like a dagger to the heart. Finally, I decided I couldn't delay any longer. That Saturday, I took the kids to the park, hoping the open space and familiar setting would soften the blow. Ethan raced to the swings as soon as we arrived, while Sophie clung to my leg, her little face scrunched in concentration as she asked if she could have ice cream afterward. Sure, sweetheart, I said, forcing a smile. Let's talk for a bit first, okay? I guided them to a quiet bench under a tree, where they sat on either side of me, their small faces looking up with curious eyes. My chest tightened. How was I supposed to explain this? So, I began, my voice trembling slightly. I want to talk to you about something important. You've probably noticed that things have been different lately. Ethan nodded, his face serious. You're not at home anymore. That's right, I said, swallowing hard. And I know it's confusing. But sometimes grown-ups go through things that make it hard for them to live together. Sophie tilted her head, her little voice full of innocence. Like when Ethan doesn't share his Legos? I managed a small laugh. Not exactly, sweetie. This is a little more serious. Mommy and I, we love you both very much, but we've decided that it's better for us to live in different houses for now. The words hung in the air, and I watched their expressions shift, Ethan's brows furrowing in confusion, Sophie's lip trembling as tears filled her big eyes. Are you and Mommy mad at each other? Ethan asked, his voice hesitant. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. We're working through some things. But this isn't your fault, okay? None of this is because of you or anything you did. Sophie sniffled, leaning into me. But I want you to come home, Daddy. Her words broke something inside me. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her close as Ethan watched with wide, uncertain eyes. I know, sweetheart. I know. But I promise, no matter where I live, I'll always be here for you. Always. Ethan stared at the ground, his voice barely audible. Is it forever? I hesitated, not wanting to make promises I couldn't keep. I don't know yet, buddy. But what I do know is that Mommy and I both love you and Sophie more than anything. That will never change. They were quiet for a long time, processing my words. Sophie clung to me like a lifeline, her tiny body shaking as she cried softly. Ethan didn't cry, but the sadness in his eyes was even harder to bear. By the time we left the park, I felt like I'd run a marathon. The weight of their sadness was unbearable, but I reminded myself that honesty was the only way forward. When I dropped them back at Emily's, she was waiting at the door. She gave me a questioning look, and I simply nodded, letting her know I'd told them. How did they take it? She asked quietly. As well as you'd expect, I said, keeping my tone curt. They're confused. Sad. But at least now they know what's going on. She opened her mouth to say something, but I walked away before she could. I didn't have the patience to hear whatever excuse or justification she had prepared. That night, I sat in the quiet of Mark's apartment, staring at my phone. I wanted to call Ethan and Sophie, to check on them, but I knew they needed time to process. Instead, I opened the parenting app Diane had recommended, bookmarking articles on co-parenting and managing separation. It was a small step, but it was a start. A few days after I spoke to the kids, Emily called me for the first time instead of texting. I almost didn't pick up, but my curiosity got the better of me. "Hello?" I said, my tone flat. "Jason, thank you for talking to the kids," she said, her voice soft. "I know that wasn't easy." "It wasn't," I replied curtly. "But they deserve the truth." There was a pause, and I could hear her take a shaky breath. "Jason, we need to talk. Really talk. Can we meet somewhere?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of her request. "Talk about what?" "You've already said everything I need to hear, Emily." "No," she said quickly, her voice rising in desperation. "There's more. Please. I need to explain, and I need you to hear me out." "Why?" I snapped. "So you can try to justify what you did? Convince me you're the victim in all this?" "No," she pleaded. "I'm not trying to excuse anything. I need to tell you the truth, all of it. And if you still want nothing to do with me after that, I'll accept it. But please, Jason. Just this one time." Her tone caught me off guard. It wasn't defensive or manipulative, it was raw, almost broken. Against my better judgment, I agreed. "Fine. Tomorrow. Noon. At the coffee shop by the library. Don't make me regret this." The next day, I arrived a few minutes early, my chest tight with a mix of anger and dread. Emily walked in right on time, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She sat down across from me, fidgeting with her hands. "Thank you for coming. Get to the point," I said coldly. She flinched but nodded. "You're right to hate me, Jason. What I did was unforgivable. I lied, I betrayed you, and I destroyed our family. But I need you to understand why it happened." "I already know why," I said, crossing my arms. "You were lonely. I was working too much. You felt neglected. That doesn't excuse what you did." "It doesn't," she agreed, tears welling in her eyes. "But it's more than that. I was scared, Jason. I was scared of how far apart we'd grown. Scared that you didn't love me anymore. And Chris, he was there, saying all the things I wanted to hear." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my temper in check. "So you ran to him instead of talking to me. That was your solution." She looked down, her hands trembling. "I know it was wrong. I know I should have talked to you, fought for us. But I didn't. I was weak, and I made a terrible mistake." "Is that what you call it? A mistake?" I said bitterly. "You didn't trip and fall into an affair, Emily. You made a series of choices. And now you want me to sit here and listen to you justify it?" "I'm not justifying it," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm owning it. And I'm begging you to give me a chance to make it right. Not for me, but for the kids. They deserve to have both their parents in their lives." I shook my head, my heart aching with frustration. "The kids will always have me in their lives. But you and I? There's no fixing this, Emily. You made sure of that." Tears streamed down her face as she nodded, defeated. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'll do whatever it takes to make this as easy as possible for Ethan and Sophie. I promise." Her words didn't soften me, but they did bring a sliver of relief. At least she wasn't planning to make the divorce a war zone. I stood up, ready to leave. "I'll be in touch through Diane. For the kids' sake, I hope you mean what you said." As I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a faint sense of closure. I didn't trust Emily, but at least the lines had been drawn. Now, it was up to me to move forward. The days after my meeting with Emily were consumed by preparations for the divorce. Diane, my lawyer, was a force to be reckoned with, cutting through the mess with surgical precision. She had me gathering documents, bank statements, text messages, anything that could strengthen my case. "Custody is going to be our main focus," Diane said during one of our meetings. "You've made it clear that you don't want Chris involved with the kids, and the court tends to side with a parent who prioritizes stability. But be prepared for a fight. I nodded, though the idea of a drawn-out legal battle made my stomach churn. What about the financial side of things? Emily doesn't make nearly as much as I do. Diane adjusted her glasses, her expression unreadable. You'll likely be on the hook for some level of spousal support, given the income disparity. But if we can prove that her affair directly impacted the marriage's breakdown, and we have plenty of evidence, there's a chance we can minimize it. Adultery doesn't always carry legal weight in our state, but it can influence the judge's perception. I sat back, exhaling slowly. Do you think she'll fight me on custody? Diane tilted her head thoughtfully. She might. If she feels threatened or if Chris is pushing her to assert her rights. But based on what you've told me about her demeanor, she might not want to escalate things. Either way, we'll be ready. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork and tense exchanges with Emily. She'd occasionally text me about logistics for the kids, pick-up times, school forms, but anything beyond that went through Diane. I kept my distance, refusing to let her pull me into emotional traps. One evening, Diane called me with an update. Emily's lawyer has proposed joint custody, but with a flexible schedule to accommodate her situation. Her situation? I repeated, my voice sharp. She's referring to her pregnancy, Diane said flatly. It's an attempt to soften the court's stance on her fitness as a parent. They'll argue that she needs support during this time, which includes keeping the kids close. I clenched my fist. The kids are not going to be used as a buffer for her and Chris. That's non-negotiable. Good, Diane said. Then we'll counter with a firm schedule. Equal time, no involvement from non-parents until a court review. It's not unreasonable, and it keeps Chris out of the picture. Hearing her confidence bolstered my resolve, but the stress of it all weighed heavily on me. Nights at Mark's apartment became quieter, lonelier, as I grappled with the reality of what was happening. The family I'd once cherished was unraveling, and the legal system was now a part of it. One afternoon, while I was reviewing more paperwork, Mark walked in with a couple of beers and plopped down beside me. You look like hell, he said, handing me a bottle. Thanks for the pep talk, I muttered, taking a swig. He grinned, but his tone softened. Seriously, Jace. You're doing all the right things. I know it doesn't feel like it now, but you'll get through this. I nodded, appreciating his support more than I could say. Mark had become my anchor through this nightmare, and I didn't know how I'd manage without him. The first court date was set for the following week. As I stood in the courthouse hallway, waiting for the session to begin, I caught a glimpse of Emily walking in with her lawyer. She looked nervous, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Our eyes met briefly, but I turned away, refusing to engage. When the hearing began, Diane laid out our case with precision, presenting evidence of Emily's infidelity and the steps I'd taken to maintain stability for the kids. Emily's lawyer countered with arguments about her role as a primary caregiver and her need for flexibility due to the pregnancy. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, listened carefully to both sides. The welfare of the children is my primary concern, she said, her tone firm. Both parents have expressed a desire to remain actively involved in their lives, which is commendable. However, the court will not tolerate behavior that disrupts the children's stability or well-being. Her words stung, even though they weren't directed at me. They were a stark reminder of how fragile this situation was. When the session ended, I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. The judge hadn't made any final rulings, but the temporary arrangement heavily favored my proposed schedule. Chris was explicitly excluded from having contact with the kids for now, and Emily's requests for flexibility were denied. It wasn't a victory, but it was a step in the right direction. The temporary custody arrangement gave me some relief, but the battle wasn't over. The judge's decision to keep Chris away from the kids was a win, but I knew Emily wasn't going to let that sit quietly. A week after the court hearing, I picked up Ethan and Sophie for my scheduled weekend. They were excited, chattering about a class project Ethan was working on and Sophie's new obsession with unicorns. Seeing them so full of life was a balm to my weary soul, but I couldn't ignore the tension in Ethan's voice when he mentioned his mom. "Mom's been crying a lot," he said as we drove home. "She says she's really sorry." "Is she okay, Dad?" The innocence in his voice cut deep. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, choosing my words carefully. "She's going through a tough time right now, buddy. But she loves you and Sophie very much." "Do you still love her?" he asked, his big eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. The question felt like a sucker punch, but I forced myself to answer honestly. "I'll always care about her because she's your mom. But things are different now. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices." Ethan nodded slowly, but the furrow in his brow told me he wasn't satisfied. At home, I focused on creating a weekend full of normalcy, movie nights, a trip to the zoo, and pancakes for breakfast. I wanted the kids to feel safe and loved, even as my own heart felt like it was being held together with duct tape. On Sunday evening, as I was getting them ready to go back to Emily's, my phone buzzed. It was a message from her. "We need to talk. It's important." I debated ignoring it, but something about the tone made me uneasy. After dropping the kids off, I called her. "What is it, Emily?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She hesitated, her breath shaky on the other end. "Jason, I just got some news from my doctor. There's a complication with the pregnancy." The words hit me like a freight train. For a moment I couldn't speak. "What kind of complication?" I finally managed. "The baby." Her voice broke, and I could hear her trying to compose herself. "There's a risk I might lose it." I didn't know what to say. As angry and betrayed as I felt, this wasn't what I wanted. I didn't wish harm on her or the baby, no matter how much it hurt knowing the child wasn't mine. "Are you okay?" I asked cautiously. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "The doctor said I need to rest and avoid stress, but that feels impossible right now. I needed you to know." I took a deep breath, grappling with a flood of conflicting emotions. "Emily, I don't know how to respond to this. I don't hate you, but I also can't fix this for you. You need to take care of yourself." She sniffled. "I know. I just thought you should hear it from me before you heard it somewhere else." We ended the call, and I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and guilt. No matter how much Emily had hurt me, the idea of her going through something like this alone was hard to bear. The next few days were a blur of emotions. I tried to focus on work and the kids, but Emily's words kept echoing in my mind. I didn't know what role, if any, I was supposed to play in her situation. She had Chris for that, didn't she? But then came another twist. On Thursday evening, Mark handed me a letter that had been left on his doorstep. "It's from Emily," he said, frowning. Figured it was safer if I didn't read it. I tore it open, my heart pounding as I read the handwritten words inside. "Jason, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but I need your help. Chris, he hasn't been around since the doctor's appointment. He's not ready for this, apparently. I don't know what to do. Please, if you can find it in your heart to talk, I'd be grateful. For the kids, if not for me." I stared at the letter, my mind reeling. Chris had bailed? After all the chaos and destruction, he couldn't even stand by her when things got hard? I didn't know what I felt, anger at him, pity for her, or just sheer exhaustion at how this nightmare kept spiraling. I set the letter down and rubbed my temples. Emily's plea was clear, but so were the boundaries I'd set. Helping her now felt like crossing the line, but ignoring her felt like abandoning someone who, for better or worse, was still the mother of my children. Mark leaned against the counter, watching me carefully. "So, what's the plan?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know what the hell I'm supposed to do." Emily's letter sat on the kitchen counter like a ticking time bomb. I must have read it a dozen times, hoping each read would give me some clarity, but all it did was remind me of the impossible position I was in. "Just ignore it," Mark said, his tone firm as he leaned against the fridge. "She's only reaching out because Chris bailed. It's not your problem. She's the kid's mom." I muttered, running a hand through my hair. If something happens to her, it becomes my problem. Mark sighed, crossing his arms. I get that, but you're not a safety net for her bad decisions. She chose this path, Jason. Let her deal with it. As much as I wanted to agree with him, I couldn't shake the nagging sense of responsibility. Emily was the mother of my children, and no matter how much I resented her for what she'd done, I couldn't ignore the possibility that she might need help. I spent the next day debating my next move, cycling between anger and guilt. By evening, I decided I couldn't leave things hanging. I needed answers, if not for her, then for my own peace of mind. I called her, and she answered on the second ring. Jason? Her voice sounded small, hesitant. I got your letter, I said, keeping my tone neutral. What's going on? She let out a shaky breath. I don't even know where to start. Chris, he's gone. After the doctor told us about the complications, he just stopped answering my calls. He sent me a text saying he needed time to think, and that was it. I clenched my jaw. Typical. The guy destroys my family, gets Emily pregnant, and bails the second things get tough. So now what? I asked. I don't know, she admitted, her voice breaking. I'm scared, Jason. The doctor said I need to avoid stress, but how am I supposed to do that when everything is falling apart? For a moment, I didn't say anything. Part of me wanted to tell her this wasn't my problem, that she should have thought about the consequences before she turned to Chris. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the good times we'd shared, couldn't ignore her desperation. Do you have someone to stay with? I asked finally. She hesitated. Not really. My parents offered, but I don't want the kids to see me like this. They'd start asking questions I'm not ready to answer. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. I'm not moving back in, Emily. That's not happening. But if you need help with the kids or anything else, I'll step up for them. You just need to be honest with me about what's going on. Thank you, she whispered. I don't deserve your kindness, but thank you. Her words didn't bring any comfort. They only reminded me of how messy this situation had become. The next morning, I called Diane to update her. She wasn't thrilled. Jason, I understand your compassion, but be careful here. Anything you do to help Emily could blur the lines we've worked so hard to establish in court. I know, I said. But I can't just ignore her, not when this could affect the kids. Diane sighed. Fine. But document everything. Every text, every call, every action you take. We need to protect your position. I spent the rest of the week helping Emily from a distance. I picked up groceries for her, took the kids on my off days, and even arranged for a neighbor to check in on her when I couldn't. She was grateful, but the dynamic between us felt strained, like we were walking on opposite sides of a crumbling bridge. One evening, after dropping off the kids, Emily stopped me at the door. Jason, I need to say this. Thank you. I know I have no right to ask for your help, but you've been here when no one else was. Not even Chris. I didn't respond immediately, my emotions a tangled knot. I'm not doing this for you, Emily. I'm doing it for Ethan and Sophie. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. I know. But it still means a lot. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the bitterness her words stirred in me. Chris's absence wasn't a surprise, but it felt like an insult piled on top of an injury. He'd caused so much destruction, and now he was off the hook, leaving me to pick up the pieces. I knew this fragile truce between Emily and me wouldn't last forever. Eventually, the court would make its decisions, and we'd have to redefine our roles in each other's lives. But for now, all I could do was focus on the kids and try to navigate the chaos one step at a time. Just as things started to settle into a tense routine, life threw another curveball. It happened on a quiet Wednesday afternoon while I was at work, slogging through emails. My phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. Jason, it's Chris. We need to talk. I stared at the message, a mix of anger and disbelief washing over me. Of all the people in the world, Chris was the last person I wanted to hear from. I debated ignoring him, but my curiosity got the better of me. There's nothing to talk about. Stay away from me and my family. I typed back, my hands trembling with restrained fury. His reply came almost instantly. It's not that simple. Can we meet? Just for 10 minutes. My jaw tightened. The audacity of this guy. But a part of me wanted answers. Why had he bailed on Emily? What game was he playing now? Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a coffee shop near my office. I arrived early, sitting in the far corner where I could watch the door. When Chris walked in, I felt my blood boil. He looked far too casual: jeans, a leather jacket, and an air of confidence that made me want to throw my coffee at him. Jason, he said, sliding into the seat across from me. Make it quick, I snapped. He raised his hands in mock surrender. Fair enough. Look, I know I screwed up, okay? I messed up with Emily, and I've made things worse by stepping back. But, I cut him off. Stepping back? You got her pregnant, destroyed my marriage, and then ghosted her when she needed you most. That's not stepping back, Chris. That's being a coward. He flinched but didn't deny it. You're right, he said quietly. I panicked. The news about the baby, the complications. I wasn't ready for any of it. But I'm trying to figure things out now. That's why I'm here. I leaned back, crossing my arms. And what do you want from me? Emily's not talking to me, he admitted, his voice strained. She blocked my number, won't answer my emails. I want to be involved, but she's shutting me out. I thought, maybe you could help. I stared at him, incredulous. Help? You think I'm going to help you after everything you've done? Do you have any idea what you've put my kids through? What you've put me through? He looked down, shame flickering across his face. I know I don't deserve your help. But I can't fix this if she won't let me. I need to be there for the baby, Jason. I want to step up. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to call him out for his hypocrisy, to tell him he'd already had his chance and blown it. But at the same time, a small part of me wondered if it would be better for Emily to have his support, if only to keep her from leaning on me. Why now? I asked coldly. Why not when she needed you the most? Chris hesitated, his confidence faltering. Because I was scared. I know that's not an excuse, but it's the truth. I've been a mess since the doctor's appointment. But I'm ready now. I laughed bitterly. Congratulations. You're ready now. Too bad life doesn't wait for cowards to get their act together. He didn't respond, just stared at me with a mix of guilt and determination. After a long pause, I leaned forward. Here's the deal, Chris. I'll talk to Emily, not for you, but because I think the baby deserves better than this circus. But if you screw this up again, you're done. Stay away from my kids, stay out of my life, and don't you dare come crawling back when things get hard. He nodded solemnly. I understand. Thank you. I didn't respond. I just grabbed my coat and left, my head spinning with anger and frustration. When I got home, I called Emily. She picked up on the second ring, her voice hesitant. Jason? We need to talk, I said, cutting straight to the point. I saw Chris today. Her sharp intake of breath told me everything I needed to know. What did he say? He wants to step up, I said flatly. He claims he's ready to be involved. She let out a bitter laugh. Now he's ready? After weeks of silence? I'm not saying you should trust him, I said. But if he's serious, it might be worth hearing him out. For the baby's sake. There was a long pause. I'll think about it, she said finally. But I'm not making any promises. Fair enough, I said. Just don't expect me to get involved again. This is between you and him. After we hung up, I felt a strange mix of relief and anger. Chris's sudden reappearance only complicated an already impossible situation, but at least I'd made it clear where I stood. The next few weeks would test us all, but one thing was certain: I wasn't letting Chris, or anyone else, derail the progress I'd made for myself and my kids. Over the next few weeks, Chris's involvement became a cautious reality. Emily agreed to meet with him after my prodding, but she kept her guard up. She didn't tell the kids anything yet. There was no way to explain the situation in a way that wouldn't confuse or hurt them. Chris started showing up, first at Emily's house and then at some of her doctor's appointments. I tried not to think about it too much, focusing instead on my time with Ethan and Sophie. I threw myself into work and parenting, determined to keep my life on track despite the chaos swirling around me. One Friday evening, I picked up the kids for the weekend. Ethan climbed into the car with a frown, his arms crossed. Mom was upset when we left, he said as soon as I buckled Sophie into her seat. Upset how? I asked, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. She and some guy were arguing, Ethan said. I think it was Chris. He yelled at her, and then she yelled back. It was loud. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I wanted to keep my voice calm, but the thought of Chris arguing with Emily in front of my kids made my blood boil. Did he say anything to you or Sophie? Ethan shook his head. No, but it was weird. He said something about being tired of this, and then he left. I clenched my jaw, taking a deep breath. Thanks for telling me, buddy. You don't have to worry about that. I'll take care of it. When we got home, I gave the kids extra attention, making sure they felt safe and secure. But my mind was already racing. After I put them to bed, I called Emily. Jason, she said, answering on the first ring. What's going on over there? I demanded. Ethan told me about your argument with Chris. Her sigh was heavy. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. He was upset because I'm still hesitant about letting him fully back into my life. He said I was shutting him out, and I told him I had every reason to. And he decided to throw a tantrum in front of the kids? I said, my voice rising. That's unacceptable, Emily. I don't care what's going on between you two. My kids shouldn't be caught in the middle of it. I know, she said quickly. I told him the same thing. He left after that. He hasn't contacted me since. Good, I snapped. Maybe he should stay gone this time. Emily didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was strained. Jason, I'm trying to juggle all of this, but it's hard. I never wanted the kids to see that side of things. I softened slightly, though my frustration still simmered. You need to figure this out, Emily. For their sake. If Chris can't handle being around them without blowing up, then he shouldn't be around them at all. I agree, she said quietly. I'll handle it. I promise. The conversation left me restless. Chris's behavior wasn't just a red flag, it was a glaring neon sign. If he couldn't handle conflict with Emily, how could he possibly co-parent a child? The next day, I got a call from Diane. Jason, we need to talk about Chris's involvement. Emily's lawyer mentioned his recent appearances, and it could complicate things if he pushes for any kind of guardianship. Guardianship? I said, the words sending a jolt through me. He's not even stable enough to handle his relationship with Emily. True, but courts sometimes look favorably on biological parents trying to step up, Diane said. If Emily allows him consistent involvement, it could muddy the waters for our case. I exhaled sharply, pacing the kitchen. So what do we do? For now, we stick to our strategy. Document everything, especially anything involving the kids. If Chris's presence becomes disruptive, we'll use it to reinforce your case for custody. I spent the rest of the weekend with a constant undercurrent of unease. I wanted to shield Ethan and Sophie from every ounce of this mess, but the reality was, I couldn't control everything. On Sunday evening, when I dropped the kids off at Emily's, she stood at the door looking exhausted. Thank you for taking them this weekend, she said. They needed a break. They don't need a break, Emily, I said, my tone sharp. They need stability. And Chris is not providing that. She looked down, her shoulders slumping. I know. I told him not to come around anymore unless he can act like an adult. If he doesn't listen, I'll cut him off completely. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, I said, walking back to the car. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this situation was nearing a tipping point. Chris's return had thrown everything into chaos, and I was running out of patience. A week later, everything came to a head. I was at work, slogging through another endless stream of emails, when my phone buzzed with a call from Emily. I almost ignored it. Her calls had become less frequent lately, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Jason," she said, her voice frantic. "It's Chris. He showed up at the house yelling. He wouldn't leave. I had to call the police." My stomach dropped. "Are you and the kids okay?" "Yes," she said quickly. "They weren't here. They're at school." "But Jason, it was bad. He was furious, saying I was keeping him from the baby, that I was ruining his life. The cops made him leave, but I don't know if he's going to stay away." Her words ignited a rage in me I hadn't felt in years. "This is exactly why I told you to keep him away. He's unstable, Emily. He's proven that over and over again." "I know," she cried. "I made a mistake trusting him. I thought he was ready to be a part of this, but he's not. I'll file a restraining order if I have to." "You will file one," I said firmly. "Because if he so much as looks at our kids, I'm going to make sure he regrets it." She didn't argue. "I'm sorry, Jason. I should have listened to you." I ended the call, my hands trembling with anger. I immediately called Diane and explained what had happened. "This is a game changer," she said, her tone decisive. "If Emily files for a restraining order and we document this incident, it strengthens your custody case significantly. It shows that Chris is a threat to the kids' stability and safety." "What about Emily?" I asked. "Will this affect her custody?" "It depends on how the court interprets her actions," Diane replied. "If she acts quickly to protect the kids, it could work in her favor. But if this escalates further, it could raise questions about her judgment." That evening, I picked up Ethan and Sophie from school. As we drove home, I did my best to stay calm, but my mind kept racing back to Chris's outburst. "Daddy?" Sophie said from the back seat. "Why did Mommy say we're staying with you for a while?" The question caught me off guard. "What did she say, sweetheart?" "She said we're going to stay at your house because her friend Chris is being mean," Sophie said, her voice small. I clenched the steering wheel, forcing myself to take a deep breath. "That's right. You'll be with me for a little while so Mommy can take care of some things. It's nothing for you to worry about." Ethan was quiet, staring out the window. I knew he understood more than Sophie did, but he didn't say anything. When we got home, I called Emily to confirm the kids would be staying with me for the foreseeable future. She agreed without hesitation. "It's better this way," she said. "I need time to sort this out." The next few days were tense but uneventful. I focused on keeping things normal for Ethan and Sophie, but the specter of Chris's outburst loomed over everything. Then, on Friday evening, Diane called with an update. "Emily filed for the restraining order," she said. "The judge granted it on a temporary basis, pending a hearing next week." "Good," I said, relief washing over me. "There's more," Diane added. "The judge also issued an emergency custody order. For now, the kids will remain with you until the situation stabilizes. Emily agreed to this, which will work in your favor when we return to court." I hung up, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. As much as I wanted to protect Ethan and Sophie, the reality of the situation was devastating. This wasn't the life I'd envisioned for them, or for me. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, Sophie clung to me tightly. "I like it here with you, Daddy," she whispered. I kissed her forehead, my chest aching. "I like having you here too, sweetheart." After they were asleep, I sat in the living room, staring at the pile of legal documents on the coffee table. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was in control. Chris's actions had pushed us all to the brink, but now, the path forward was clear. My priority was protecting Ethan and Sophie, no matter what. And if that meant going to war in court, so be it.